Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom in our continuing discussion of the Protestant Reformation, right? And we're going to talk about it or focus in on how it's going to spread to England. Now, some of you are probably asking, why does this flip exist, Mr. Terry? We just talked about this stuff in class. Well, the thing about it is I feel like I did a terrible job at explaining this.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Yeah, I know. The big thing I wanted to do is actually kind of take a step back, right? And just take a moment to further explain and better explain and give myself kind of like a redemption style flip to re-explain the expansion of the Protestant Reformation into England and discuss the creation of what would be later known as the Anglican Church or the Church of England under none other than this guy, the very, very famous Henry VIII of the Tudor dynasty, right? Now, the thing about it, though, that I feel like kind of happened yesterday is I went a lot off assumption that you knew things. I was kind of really all over the place in the story, and I got a couple of really, really great questions from people like Kinsey, and then also from Jalea as well, who were just like really making me realize like, man, dude, you could have done a little bit of a better job, right? So I decided to take a second to make this little short flip so you can rewatch it, but I'm going to go quick, and I'm not going to linger on things, and I'm going to move through the story so it's a little bit more expeditious, right? But where we're going to see, or what we're going to see happen, is we're going to see the Protestant Reformation leave the continent of Europe, where it started in the Holy Roman Empire underneath Martin Luther, and it's going to spread, right? And really quickly, when it spreads, it's going to go hop over the English Channel, and it's going to head to the country of England, right? Now, at the time, whenever we're seeing things develop in England, when the actual Protestant Reformation broke out, Henry VIII was still an ardent Catholic, right? He was a very, very good Catholic as well. He was going to become king eventually, and in 1521, he literally wrote a book or a dialogue called the Defending the Seven Sacraments, right? And in this book, he talked about how Martin Luther was wrong and how Catholicism was the one true church, and there was no need to create any new branches or church, right? At the time, he was married to Catherine of Aragon, and he literally only had one surviving child, right? Mary Tudor. Catherine was Catholic, Mary was Catholic, Henry was Catholic, and everybody was moving on in their little happy way. And he did such a good job writing this book that he was given the title Defender of the Faith, right? Which is like the Nobel Prize for being Catholic, right? And literally this title is going to be a very famous one. It's still given out to this day, right? But the thing that ends up happening is down the road, right? Henry and Catherine can't do something very important, all right? And now, really quickly, it's not that important. We'll see later in the future. But the thing about it, though, is it's important to Henry, right? And Henry desperately wants to have a son, right? He wants to have a son because he wants to avoid a succession crisis. Why does he want to avoid a succession crisis, Mr. Terry? That's a great question, Jalea. Mostly due to the fact that his family is only on the throne of England because of one that occurred previously, right? So basically what happened was there was this dynasty called the Plantagenet dynasty in England that died out without any without anyone who was heir to the throne. And what resulted in it was a massive war between two different families, right? The Yorks and the Lancasters. And this war spread throughout all of England, claiming thousands of lives, right? And it was a civil war. And this York and Lancaster fight against one another to see who would claim dominance in the throne of England could have easily been avoided. But it literally was one of the most chaotic and climactic periods of English history. And it was known as the War of the Roses, right? The reason why it's called the War of the Roses is because the Yorks and Lancasters both had roses on their royal coats of arms, right? So it's like the roses are fighting each other, right? So the thing about it, though, is Henry wanted to avoid another war like that because the only reason he's on the throne is because a member of the York family and a member of the Lancaster family got married and created the Tudor family, right? Now, to understand this, though, to make it so his family stays in power, he really wants to have a son. But Catherine keeps having Catherine keeps having failed pregnancies, and they only have one surviving child, that being Mary, right? So what he wants is his divorce annulled, right? Which will create a giant rift between him and his soon-to-be ex-wife. Also, what's going to happen as well is you're going to see a rift be created between him and his daughter, Mary, right? So the thing about it, though, is he wants this divorce annulled. He wants to go off and find a new wife, and he wants to try and have a son with them. He goes to the Pope. He asks the Pope for an annulment, and the Pope says no, right? The Pope says no, and just like Darius, he's very upset. Now, the thing about it, though, is he's really, really upset because something you need to understand about economics and geopolitics in Europe at the time, annulments were common for kings, right? It was a very normal thing for kings to get annulments, to go off and get married to other people so they could have a son, right? Because they were trying to create a legitimate heirdom to the throne, okay? So what you need to understand, though, also going forward is why did the Pope say no? Well, the Pope said no because Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who's going to be very important in a later unit, told him to say no, right? He literally saved the Pope from several different things, and also he had a lot of power over the Pope at the time, and he goes, hey, tell that guy to tell him no, because my aunt is Catherine of Aragon, and I don't want my family, the Habsburg family, to lose any power in Europe, right? And so the thing about it is it was a very, very large, like very big, like political kerfuffle, and Henry goes, all right, you know, I was the defender of the faith and I love being Catholic and stuff like that. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make my own church, right? And so what ends up happening is Henry creates his own church. He reforms Parliament a little bit. He sticks people in there. We'll talk about what Parliament is and stuff like that in a later unit. The thing about it, though, is he reforms Parliament and he puts people in there that he knows will support him. And he passes through Parliament a resolution to create a brand new church and to separate England from the Catholic Church completely. Basically doing what Martin Luther did, but in a very political way, right? This is less about faith, this is more about politics, right? And he's trying to exert his power over the top of the Pope and create this thing called religious hegemony, right? Like, which is actually one singular church inside of a country, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is he does this and he creates his brand new church known as the Church of England or the Anglican Church. And the moment that he creates this church, he gets that, like, marriage to Catherine annulled, right? He gets that marriage to Catherine annulled, alienating his relationship with his now ex-wife, and then also creating an enemy in his daughter, right? His daughter and Catherine then get sent away and banished to a monastery in the like western parts of England or the Isle of England, where Catherine eventually dies, and Mary sits there fuming for decades, refusing to ever leave Catholicism and hating her father with a fury, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is with the girl that he ends up getting married to, this guy, Henry VIII ends up getting married to, is this woman, a woman by the name of Anne Boleyn, who would be his second wife, right? He divorces Catherine and marries Anne Boleyn. So why did he create this new church? Simply to get a divorce, but also another big reason why is because he's exerting monarchical power. Something that you need to understand really, really quickly is the 1500s, we are seeing a dramatic uptick, write this down, a dramatic uptick in monarchical power, right? Monarchs are exerting more power than they ever have, right? And in this case, the monarch of England created a brand new church just to say, take that, Pope, right? And stick it to him as hard as he could. Now, the thing about it, though, is when he does divorce Catherine and he goes off and marries Anne Boleyn might have actually been pregnant at the wedding already. So Henry, bad. Now look, but what ends up happening, though, is Anne Boleyn eventually gives birth to not a boy, but a girl, right? And ends up giving birth to a girl by the name of Elizabeth, right? Who would later on become Elizabeth, the Queen of England, or Elizabeth I, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is we now have two surviving kids, right? Mary and Elizabeth, okay? Well, the problem is Henry is going to do with what he always does, and when he actually blames the woman for being the reason why that, like, they can't have a son, he decides he wants to get a divorce from Anne Boleyn as well. But we're going to give that a whole second. So everybody really quick hit pause on the Henry and his wife story and then take a gander over here, right? In the process of actually doing all of this stuff, and also during the time period of which he was still married to Anne Boleyn, he passes a couple of really big acts through Parliament, right? One of them being known as the Act of Supremacy, right? Now, this is a really, really big example of Henry exerting his power as well, because the Act of Supremacy was literally an act that required the subjects of England to take an oath declaring Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England, basically creating the kingdom, like the kingship or the ruler of England and the head of the church or the Pope of the new Anglican Church to be one and the same, right? Creating one powerful body at the very, very top of the English government, right? And it would completely break away everyone from the Holy Roman Catholic Church, right? And also with this Act of Supremacy as well, he passed another one called the Act of Treason, right? Basically saying that if you violate this the Act of Supremacy and if you try to keep being Catholic, you can be punished and possibly arrested, right? Further alienating his daughter Mary, who is still very, very Catholic, and also creating a rift between him and a lot of his advisors, right? Because a bunch of his advisors are like, hey man, I don't think you should do all this stuff. And then he has them executed, right? Creating, again, himself at a very, very large, powerful part of the English government, right? Now, when this whole thing, though, now back to his little personal life story and stuff like that, right? But the Act of Supremacy is a big deal. Shows him exerting that monarchical power once again, right? But back to the story again, right? He's still married to Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn has a girl, and he's like, you know what? I need to go find myself another lady so I can try to have a boy instead of being with you, Anne. And then Anne goes, no, we staying together. And she basically refuses to get a divorce from him. So what he does is he decides to invoke that Act of Supremacy and Act of Treason, and he has Anne charged with witchcraft, incest and adultery, right? And the adultery and the incest part actually went together because he said that she cheated on him with her brother. Gross. Now, that actually didn't happen, and it's very, very unfounded, but he just wanted Anne Boleyn executed, right? And so what ends up happening is Anne Boleyn doesn't get executed, right? And she is one of the wives that died, right? Or, excuse me, that, got beheaded, okay? I'm sorry about that. Not died. One just died, right? But this one got beheaded. Two of them actually got beheaded. Because you need to remember something really, really quickly. Out of the 6 wives that Henry had altogether, only 2 of them were beheaded. But we'll get back to a little bit more of that here in a second. So now that he's single, again, and has now 2 surviving children, one named Mary, one named Elizabeth, he decides to go off and find himself another wife. And this time he marries a woman by the name of Jane Seymour, right? Jane Seymour is who he gets married to on his 3rd marriage, and apparently it's the only woman that he ever truly loved, is what he said. And the reason why I think he is probably the only reason that he loved her is because she produced for him finally a boy. Boy is finally here, right? And his name was Edward the Sixth, right? But he looked like this. I know, gross. So really quick though, going into it, Jane also is going to die during childbirth, right? So the thing about it though is that now Henry has 3 surviving kids and now has 3 ex-wives, right? 3 ex-wives, 3 surviving kids, 3 ex-wives. The order of the children in age order goes Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, right? Now, something that's also going to happen, though, right after Edward is born, Henry is going to sign a very all-important document and create a very new thing known as the Third Secession Act of 1543, right? And this secessionary act would actually say that Edward would take the throne first, but if something should happen to him, the daughters take the throne afterward to try and avoid another civil war breaking out, much like the War of the Roses, okay? So what ends up going down, though, is Henry does go on to have 3 more wives, but none of those other marriages produce children, okay? The thing about it, when we look at Henry's wives, you don't need to know all of them. The only wives you truly need to know are, let me scratch that real quick. The only thing about the wives you truly need to know is the manner in which they died, because a lot of people believe that he just beheaded all of his wives, which is not true. He had 6 of them in total, and the order of what happened to them goes like this: divorced, beheaded, died; divorced, beheaded, survived, right? If you ever want to kind of way to remember what happened to him, is divorced, beheaded, died; divorced, beheaded, survived, right? And so of course what's going to end up happening is the beheading of number 5 mainly just happened due to the fact that she cheated on him with one of his advisors, who he had both of them beheaded for that injustice, and then his last wife just outlived him and stuff like that. But what ends up going down, though, is Henry VIII would eventually die due to complications with a leg injury and also his morbid obesity at the time, caused by the fact that he couldn't get out of his bed and things like that, right? He couldn't get out of his bed because his leg was so jacked up, and he ended up actually getting so large that he ended up having a coronary embolism, and he died from a heart attack and a stroke later in life, right? So who gets to take the throne now after Henry finally dies and has created this brand new church called the Church of England, or the Anglican Church? You're going to see his son rise to power. And his son's name is Edward, or Edward the Sixth. And conveniently, Edward the Sixth also only ruled for about 6 years, all right? Because when Henry died, Edward was about the age of 7. So yeah, he was about 7 years old at the time, right? Wait, no. 8 years old at the time. Yes, 8. No, 9 years old at the time. Now, look, big thing about it, though, is Edward takes the throne, but he doesn't rule for very long. The reason why he doesn't rule for very long, he was very sick, right? When I played that audio and stuff like that, where I was like, oh, God, what happened there? So yeah, it's mostly due to the fact that Edward was born a very ill child, right? And he was sick for most of his life, all right? On and off again with bouts of fever, flu, and different kinds of things of pneumonia and stuff like that. But what would eventually happen is when Edward was 15 years old, he died from a disease known as tuberculosis. And he was 15, so he didn't have enough time to get married nor have other kids, right? Now, he tried to prevent his sister from getting the throne, because the thing we need to be looking at right now is wait a minute, if Edward dies, who gets the throne next? It's the really mean one, right? Mary, the one that's super mad and hates her dad with a fury, will now be the next in line for the throne, right? He tried to prevent this, and he tried to give the throne to this woman named Lady Jane Grey, who was one of his cousins, right? So yeah, but it didn't actually work out because she was not a part of the Secessionary Act of 1543. So what ends up happening is Mary raises an army and kills Lady Jane Grey, Edward's cousin, and decides to have her executed and stuff like that. And literally she's known as the 9 days queen, right? Because literally she was only queen for about 9 days before Mary shows up with an army and overthrows her and installs herself as Queen of England, right? Now, when Mary became Queen of England, though, and returned, she shows up and comes back into the palace, she decides that she is going to invoke her wrath and fury. And she is super mad and upset because of all of the actions of her father. And she stayed an ardent Catholic her entire life, right? So what she decides to do is she wants to yank England back to Catholicism as hard as she can, right? She wants to ban the Church of England, outlaw Protestantism, and create a new Catholic country. Funny enough, in this entire moment, the Pope actually gives her that award of Defender of the Faith, right? Which is actually kind of funny and ironic, right? Now, so going into it, though, you have to understand what she's also going to do, though, as well. She was very well known for if you refused to go back to Catholicism or if you kept practicing Protestantism, she would have you burned at the stake, right? And she had upwards of over 300 people burned at the stake, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. That's right, the lady that she talked to in the bathroom was a real lady, right? Also, the lady that the drink is named after is a real lady, right? So Bloody Mary, also known as Mary the First or Mary Tudor, is going to be the one that actually gets that nickname. But the thing about it, so you need to understand, she didn't live for very long, all right? Because the thing about it was when she actually came to power in England, she was about 36 or 37. She's about my age. Now, in the 1500s, that's pretty old, and something could happen to you at any moment. You might stub your toe and die, right? And so she ends up actually dying, all right, after only about 5 years on the throne and stuff like that. And then who is going to rise to power? But her sister, Elizabeth, right? Who is actually still very much an Anglican practicing person and a Protestant as well. And so she decides to bring the Anglican Church back. And after all of this chaos, she is the Band-Aid that England needed, right? Elizabeth becomes Elizabeth the First, and she decides to do something very important and something that inspires Enlightenment thinkers later on. And she wants to take the church and the state and begin to separate them, right? And be like, our government is here, our religion is here, right? They can work together, but they should never be one and the same, right? So like now, and she actually makes it so the ruler is more like the governor of the church and somebody who is a figurehead of the church, but not someone who rules over it. She actually relinquishes a lot of that control to a position of a person known as the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? So that right there is the like of the Reformation in England, and we will come back to all these people a little bit later on when we start our absolutism unit. But I hope that was a little bit of a better explanation of Henry VIII and the spread of the Protestant Reformation into England. Just remember the big bullet points, right? Henry VIII has 6 different wives in his journey to try and have a boy. He creates a brand new church because of this. He ends up having girl, girl, boy, right? And what ends up going down is it goes boy, girl, girl, mean girl in the middle that ends up actually ruling over England. But that's it. This was an optional flip. I hope this helped some of y'all in your studying, and I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.